You know that moment when you can feel everything about to go sideways, like when you're driving and see black ice ahead, but it's too late to hit the brakes? That's exactly what the conference room felt like that Tuesday morning in November, when Brian Collins walked in wearing his too tight navy suit and those ridiculous loafers with no socks. My name is Mark Thompson, and at 48 years old, I'd been the operations director at Atlas Supply Chain Solutions for 12 years. Before that, I spent 8 years in the Army handling logistics for the 82nd Airborne. Everything from coordinating mess halls to moving entire battalions across 3 continents. When you've managed supply drops under fire in Afghanistan, civilian logistics should be a walk in the park. Turns out, corporate warfare has its own unique challenges. In the civilian world, my military experience translated to keeping $2.8 billion worth of supply chains running smoothly across the Midwest. I don't panic. I don't yell. When a shipment of critical automotive parts gets stuck in customs and Ford's assembly line is about to shut down, I'm the guy they call at 3 a.m. I drink black coffee, work the phones, and fix problems. That's what I do. Atlas Supply Chain Solutions was a solid company. We weren't the biggest player in Chicago, but we had something the giants didn't: reliability. Our clients knew that when they signed with Atlas, their shipments would arrive on time, every time. No surprises, no excuses, no BS. In an industry where a single delayed truck can cost a manufacturer millions, that reliability was worth its weight in gold. Our biggest client was Wright Manufacturing, run by Aaron Wright. Aaron was 64 years old, built like a brick wall, and had been manufacturing automotive parts since before Brian Collins was born. Wright Manufacturing was worth $750 million annually to Atlas, about 40% of our total revenue. Aaron didn't just trust us with his logistics. He trusted us with his reputation. Aaron and I had history. Real history, not the superficial business relationship crap you see at networking events. We'd worked together through the 2008 recession when half his suppliers went under and banks were calling in loans left and right. I personally drove a truck full of steel bearings from Pittsburgh to Detroit in a blizzard because Aaron's production line couldn't wait for the regular delivery schedule. We sat in truck stops drinking terrible coffee and figuring out how to keep his factory running when the entire automotive industry was imploding. That's the kind of relationship you build over 12 years. Trust earned through crisis, not PowerPoint presentations. Gary Collins, our CEO, had always understood this. Gary was 67 years old, a former Navy logistics officer who'd built Atlas from a 2-truck operation into a regional powerhouse. He knew the value of long-term relationships, and he knew better than to mess with what wasn't broken. Gary was planning to retire next year, and frankly, most of us figured he'd promote me to run the company. I had the experience, the relationships, and the track record. Then, Brian showed up. Brian Collins, Gary's 34-year-old son, fresh from his MBA program at Northwestern. He'd spent exactly 18 months in the family business, 6 months in accounting, 6 months in sales, 6 months learning operations. Now Gary had named him Vice President of Strategic Development, which was corporate speak for future CEO in training. Brian had that MBA confidence that comes from case studies and theoretical frameworks. He talked about optimizing customer touch points and leveraging synergistic opportunities. He'd never loaded a truck, never spent a night in a truck stop, never had to explain to a plant manager why their shipment was stuck on the wrong side of a bridge collapse. But he had charts. God, did he have charts. Mark, he'd said during our first one-on-one meeting, I've been analyzing our client portfolio, and I think we're leaving serious money on the table. We're practically giving away premium services. Take Wright Manufacturing. They're getting white glove treatment for standard rates. That's not sustainable in today's competitive landscape. I'd tried to explain the Aaron Wright situation. How that account wasn't just about profit margins. How Aaron sent us referrals worth millions. How he'd stuck with us during the recession when bigger companies were offering him better rates. How some relationships were worth more than the immediate revenue they generated. Brian listened with that polite smile you give to your grandfather when he starts talking about the good old days. Then he said, Mark, that's old school thinking. Business is about maximizing shareholder value, not maintaining cozy relationships. We need to evolve or we'll get left behind. The thing about military training is it teaches you to read situations quickly. Brian wasn't interested in learning from experience. He was interested in proving he was smarter than the people who'd built the company before he arrived. He was looking at our client list like a surgeon looking at unnecessary organs, things that could be cut out to make the body more efficient. And now, on this Tuesday morning in November, Brian was walking into our weekly operations meeting with a stack of folders and that same confident smile. He'd been dropping hints all week about big changes coming and exciting new initiatives, the kind of language that makes experienced people start updating their resumes. "Good morning, team," Brian announced, settling into his chair like he owned the place, which technically he would someday. "I've got some exciting updates on our right manufacturing strategy that I think you're all going to love." I felt that familiar knot in my stomach, the same feeling I got in Afghanistan right before everything went to hell. "I've been doing a deep dive on the right account," Brian continued, spreading his charts across the conference table like he was planning D-Day. "And frankly, I'm seeing some concerning patterns. We're essentially subsidizing their operations instead of running a profitable business relationship." Sarah Martinez, our head of client services, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She'd been with Atlas for 8 years and knew the right account inside and out. "Brian, the right relationship has been consistently profitable. Their volume alone justifies the service level." "Sarah, that's exactly the kind of thinking that's holding us back," Brian said with that patronizing tone that probably worked great on his study group. "Yes, they generate revenue, but are we maximizing that relationship's potential? I've run the numbers, and we're leaving at least 30% additional profit on the table." I kept my mouth shut, but my jaw was getting tight. In the Army, we had a saying about officers who'd never been in the field trying to tell seasoned NCOs how to do their jobs. It usually didn't end well for anybody. "Here's what I'm proposing," Brian said, flipping to a slide titled Right Manufacturing Optimization Strategy. "First, we implement dynamic pricing based on demand fluctuations. Second, we establish minimum order thresholds for premium service levels. Third, we introduce quarterly business reviews to ensure strategic alignment." The room went quiet. Tom Bradley, our warehouse manager who'd been loading trucks since before Brian could drive, finally spoke up. "Brian, Aaron Wright doesn't do business that way. He values consistency and reliability over everything else." "Tom, that's exactly the problem," Brian replied. "We're letting the client dictate terms instead of positioning ourselves as strategic partners. It's time Aaron Wright understood that premium service comes with premium pricing." I felt something cold settle in my chest. This kid was about to blow up a relationship that had taken 12 years to build, and he thought he was being innovative. "Brian," I said, keeping my voice level, "Aaron's been through 3 recessions, 2 supplier bankruptcies, and the 2008 financial crisis. He doesn't want strategic partnerships. He wants his parts delivered on time, every time, without surprises. That's what we've given him for over a decade." "Mark, I appreciate the historical perspective," Brian said, and I could hear the dismissal in his voice. "But we can't let nostalgia drive business decisions. Aaron Wright needs to understand that Atlas is evolving. We're not the same company his grandfather's generation worked with." That hit me wrong. Aaron's grandfather hadn't worked with Atlas. Aaron had built his relationship with us from scratch, truck by truck, delivery by delivery. Brian was talking about our most important client like he was some kind of legacy burden instead of the foundation our company was built on. "What exactly are you planning?" I asked. Brian smiled like he'd been waiting for this question. "I'm going to sit down with Aaron next week and present our new service model. Face to face, businessman to businessman. It's time to have an adult conversation about what this relationship really looks like going forward." The room temperature seemed to drop about 10 degrees. Sarah actually winced. Tom stared at his coffee cup like it might contain answers to life's great mysteries. "Brian," I said carefully, "Aaron doesn't do presentations. He's old school. The man built his company on handshake deals and personal trust. Mark, everyone appreciates straight talk if you deliver it professionally," Brian said. "I've been analyzing Wright's operational patterns, really diving deep into their logistics needs. The data tells a clear story. They need us more than we need them, and it's time our pricing reflected that reality." I tried one more time. "Aaron values relationships above spreadsheets. He's stuck with us through tough times because we've stuck with him. That loyalty runs both ways." "Loyalty is a luxury we can't afford in today's competitive marketplace," Brian replied. "Business is about maximizing value for all stakeholders. If Aaron Wright is truly a strategic partner, he'll understand that mutual prosperity requires mutual investment." The kid was speaking in business school buzzwords, but what I heard was someone who'd never had to look a plant manager in the eye and explain why his production line was shutting down. Someone who'd never spent Christmas Eve in a truck stop because a client needed an emergency delivery. Someone who thought relationships were just another line item on a profit and loss statement. Gary Collins walked into the room at that moment, coffee in hand, looking tired. At 67, Gary was ready to step back, and everybody knew it. He'd built Atlas on the principle that your word was your bond, that relationships mattered more than quarterly earnings, and that taking care of your clients meant they'd take care of you. "Morning, team," Gary said, settling into his chair. "Brian, I hear you've got some new initiatives to discuss." "Dad, I was just explaining the right optimization strategy to the team," Brian said. "I think it's exactly the kind of forward-thinking approach Atlas needs as we move into the next phase." Gary nodded slowly. He looked around the room, taking in our faces. Tom was studying his hands. Sarah was examining her pen like it was a fascinating artifact. I was probably grinding my teeth. "Son," Gary said finally, "Aaron Wright called me yesterday. Something about changes to his service agreement." Brian straightened up, clearly pleased. "Yes, I sent him a preliminary overview of our new strategic framework. I wanted to give him time to review it before our meeting next week." The silence that followed was the kind you hear right before thunder. Gary's face didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. The same look he got when a driver called in with a truck breakdown or a client complaint. "You sent Aaron Wright a strategic framework," Gary said slowly, like he was translating a foreign language. "A comprehensive service optimization proposal," Brian corrected. "It outlines how we can create a more sustainable, mutually beneficial relationship moving forward." Gary set his coffee cup down very carefully. "Brian, Aaron Wright has been our client since before you could spell logistics. He doesn't want optimization proposals. He wants his parts delivered on time." "Dad, that's exactly the kind of old-fashioned thinking that's holding Atlas back," Brian said. "Aaron Wright needs to understand that business relationships evolve. We can't keep operating like it's 1995. And that's when I knew this was going to end badly." Gary picked up his phone and dialed. Right there in the conference room, in front of all of us. "Aaron, it's Gary Collins. Yes, I got your message. I think we need to talk." The conversation was brief, professional, and deadly quiet on Gary's end. "A lot of I understand, and we'll handle this immediately." When he hung up, the room felt like a tomb. "Brian," Gary said, his voice carrying the weight of 35 years in business. "Aaron Wright is coming in tomorrow morning. He wants to discuss the future of our relationship." Brian actually looked pleased. "Perfect. That gives me time to prepare a comprehensive presentation. I've got some great ideas about how we can modernize the partnership." "No," Gary said simply. "You won't be in that meeting." The color drained from Brian's face. "Dad, this is my initiative. I should be the one to present." "Son, you've done enough." Gary stood up slowly. "Mark, you and I need to prepare for damage control. Everyone else back to work. We've got trucks to load and promises to keep." As the room emptied, Brian lingered, clearly wanting to argue his case. Gary waited until it was just the three of us. "Brian, I know you think you're helping," Gary said, his voice gentler than I expected. "But Aaron Wright isn't some account we can optimize. He's the reason this company survived 2008. He's the reason we could make payroll during the recession. You don't fix what isn't broken." "It is broken, Dad," Brian insisted. "We're leaving money on the table every single day. Our profit margins on the right account are below industry standards. That's not sustainable." "Profit margins," Gary repeated, like the words tasted bitter. "Son, let me tell you about profit margins. In 2009, when General Motors was going bankrupt and half our clients were defaulting on payments, Aaron Wright advanced us $2 million to cover our operating costs. No contract, no legal guarantees, just a handshake and his word. That's worth more than any profit margin calculation you'll find in your MBA textbooks." I watched Brian process this information. You could see him trying to fit it into his business framework, trying to find the spreadsheet category for loyalty and trust. "That was 14 years ago," Brian said finally. "Market conditions have changed. We can't base current strategy on historical sentiment." And that's when I knew this kid was going to destroy everything Gary had built. Next morning, Aaron Wright walked into our offices at exactly 9 a.m. Aaron was always punctual, military habit from his Vietnam days. He was wearing his usual uniform, dark blue work shirt, khakis, and steel-toed boots that had seen more factory floors than most people see in a lifetime. Aaron Wright wasn't just successful, he was respected. The kind of man who still shook hands on million-dollar deals, who knew every employee's name, who'd worked his way up from the factory floor to the executive suite. When Aaron spoke, people listened because his words carried the weight of 40 years of getting things done. Gary and I met him in the small conference room, not the formal boardroom. Aaron preferred it that way. Less pretense, more conversation. We'd done hundreds of meetings in that room over the years, figured out delivery schedules, solved logistics problems, weathered economic storms. "Gary, Mark," Aaron said, settling into his chair. "I'll cut to the chase. I got this interesting document yesterday from your son. Strategic framework, he called it." Aaron pulled out a printed copy of Brian's proposal. It was impressive looking. Color charts, graphs, executive summary. The kind of document that probably earned Brian good grades in business school. "He wants to implement surge pricing on my deliveries," Aaron said, flipping through the pages. "Dynamic rate adjustments based on market demand, minimum order thresholds for premium service, and something called quarterly strategic alignment reviews." Gary's jaw tightened. "Aaron, I want you to know that document was sent without my approval." "I figured as much," Aaron said. "But here's the thing, Gary. Your boy also mentioned that Atlas is evolving and that I need to adapt to new marketplace realities. He suggested that our current arrangement is, and I quote, unsustainable in today's competitive landscape." The room went quiet. Aaron set the document down and looked directly at Gary. "Gary, we've been working together for 12 years. My company has grown from $200 million to $750 million in annual revenue during that time. Atlas has handled every pound of freight, every delivery, every emergency shipment. You've never missed a deadline, never surprised me with hidden costs, never failed to answer the phone when I called." Aaron paused, choosing his words carefully. "But now your son is telling me that relationship needs to be optimized. He wants to charge me extra for priority handling during busy seasons, the same priority handling I've been getting for over a decade. He wants me to justify my shipping volume in quarterly reviews like I'm some kind of new account." Gary started to speak, but Aaron held up a hand. "Let me finish. I've built Wright Manufacturing on consistency and reliability. I don't want strategic partnerships or dynamic pricing models. I want to call Mark at 6 a.m. when there's a production crisis and know that my parts will be on the road within the hour. I want to pay the same rate in January that I pay in November. I want to work with people who understand that business is built on trust, not spreadsheets." Aaron leaned back in his chair. "Your son doesn't understand that. He sees me as an underperforming asset that needs optimization. I see you as partners who've earned my loyalty and my business." The silence stretched until Gary finally spoke. "Aaron, Brian is young. He's got ideas, but he doesn't have experience. This company was built on relationships like ours, and that's not changing." "Maybe not," Aaron said. "But succession planning is part of business, Gary. You're 67 years old. You won't be running Atlas forever. When you step down, will your son honor the commitments you've made, or will he optimize me right out the door?" And that's when I realized Aaron Wright wasn't just upset about Brian's proposal. He was questioning the future of Atlas itself. Gary looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. "Aaron, I give you my word that Atlas will honor every commitment we've made. Brian is learning, but this company's values aren't changing." Aaron nodded slowly. "I hope that's true, Gary. But here's my concern. Last month I had lunch with Pete Morrison from Morrison Steel. He told me an interesting story about his logistics provider. New management came in, implemented efficiency improvements, and within 6 months, Pete was looking for a new supplier because his delivery costs had doubled and his service quality had crashed. The message was clear. Aaron Wright wasn't just upset about Brian's proposal. He was worried about becoming the next Pete Morrison. "I need some assurance, Gary," Aaron continued. "Not just your word, though I've never had reason to doubt it. I need to know that the person managing my account understands my business and my needs." That's when Brian walked in. I don't know if he'd been listening outside the door or if his timing was just spectacularly bad, but he walked into that room like he was making a grand entrance at his own graduation party. "Mr. Wright," Brian said, extending his hand with a confident smile. "I'm Brian Collins, VP of Strategic Development. I'm excited to finally meet face to face." Aaron shook his hand politely, but I could see the temperature in the room drop about 20 degrees. I hope you had a chance to review the strategic framework I sent, Brian continued, completely oblivious to the atmosphere. I think you'll find it addresses some inefficiencies in our current arrangement that, frankly, nobody's been willing to discuss. Gary started to say something, but Aaron held up a hand. Mr. Collins, I did review your document. Very thorough. Tell me, how long have you been working in logistics? Well, I've been with Atlas for 18 months now, rotating through different departments to get a comprehensive understanding of our operations, Brian said proudly. Before that, I completed my MBA at Northwestern, focusing on supply chain optimization and strategic partnerships. 18 months, Aaron repeated. And before your MBA, I worked in consulting for 2 years straight out of college. Really gave me a broad perspective on how different industries approach operational challenges. Aaron nodded thoughtfully. So you've never actually worked in manufacturing? Not directly, no. But modern business is about understanding systems and processes, not just industry-specific experience. The principles of optimization apply across all sectors. I watched Aaron's face. It was like watching someone realize they were talking to a person who'd learned how to swim from a textbook but had never been in the water. Mr. Collins, Aaron said quietly, let me tell you about my business. Wright Manufacturing makes precision automotive parts. We supply components for brake systems, steering assemblies, and engine mounts. When one of our parts fails, people die. When our deliveries are late, assembly lines shut down, and thousands of people go home without pay. Brian nodded enthusiastically. Exactly why we need to implement more rigorous quality controls and performance metrics. Stop, Aaron said, his voice cutting through Brian's response like a blade. I don't need quality controls. I need reliability. For 12 years, Atlas has delivered my parts on schedule, every schedule. Mark has never failed me once. Not once. Aaron stood up slowly. Your strategic framework wants to charge me extra for priority handling during busy seasons. Mr. Collins, every season is busy season when you're making safety-critical parts. Your framework wants to implement minimum order thresholds. Sometimes I need one emergency shipment of a single component to keep a production line running. Brian opened his mouth to respond, but Aaron wasn't finished. Your framework treats my business like it's a commodity account that needs optimization. My business is built on relationships with people who understand that when I call at midnight because there's a production crisis, it's not a billable event, it's what partners do for each other. The room went dead quiet. Aaron looked at Gary, then at me, then back at Brian. Mr. Collins, I'm sure you're very smart, and I'm sure your MBA taught you a lot about strategic frameworks. But you don't understand my business, you don't understand my needs, and frankly, you don't understand the difference between efficiency and effectiveness. Brian's face was red. Mr. Wright, with all due respect, your resistance to modernization is exactly the kind of thinking that prevents businesses from reaching their full potential. We're offering you a chance to participate in a more sophisticated, mutually beneficial partnership. That's when I stood up. Brian, I said quietly, you need to stop talking. Mark, this is exactly what I was talking about, Brian said, turning to me with frustration. This old-school mentality is holding us back. Mr. Wright needs to understand that business relationships evolve. I looked at Aaron Wright, this man who'd stuck with us through recessions, who'd advanced us money when we needed it, who'd sent us millions in referrals over the years. He was sitting there being lectured by a 34-year-old kid who thought relationships were just another line item on a profit and loss statement. You're right, Brian, I said. Business relationships do evolve. I turned to Aaron. Aaron, I want you to know that everything Brian just said is exactly why I'm resigning from Atlas effective immediately. The silence that followed was absolute. Gary's mouth fell open. Brian looked like he'd been slapped. Aaron Wright just nodded slowly, like he'd been expecting this. I've been thinking about starting my own operation, I continued. Thompson Tactical Logistics. Small, focused, built on the idea that relationships matter more than spreadsheets. Aaron, if you're looking for a logistics partner who understands that your business isn't a strategic framework waiting to be optimized, give me a call. I pulled out my business cards I'd had printed 2 weeks ago when I first realized where this was heading, and handed one to Aaron. "Gentlemen," I said, heading for the door, "it's been educational." 3 months later, Thompson Tactical Logistics had signed Wright Manufacturing, Morrison Steel, and Patterson Automotive. Combined annual revenue, $1.2 billion. All 3 clients followed me from Atlas within 60 days of my resignation. Brian Collins was let go last month. I heard through the grapevine that Atlas's revenue dropped 45% in the first quarter after I left. Gary Collins had to postpone his retirement to try to rebuild the relationships his son had destroyed. Aaron Wright called me yesterday. "Mark," he said, "you know what the difference is between strategy and tactics? Strategy is what you plan. Tactics are what you do when the plan falls apart. Sometimes the best revenge is just doing your job better than the people who thought they could replace you."